What happened to Nancy Guthrie? It's the question that still hasn't been answered now 12 days after she vanished. The FBI says they're tracking persons of interest, but the identity of the masked person caught on Nancy's doorstep remains a mystery. And now with these chilling images revealed, the question is bigger than ever. Who took the 84-year-old? We are digging into it all. We're on The Case just trying to figure out what happened to the mom of Today Show host Savannah Guthrie. And there are so many theories that are out there, so much speculation. Frankly, it can be exhausting looking at all the speculation. Now, we investigated 5 theories that may end up being the direction that law enforcement takes in investigating this case. Now, before we dive into these theories, I do want to break down some of the latest information that we know at this point. One of them, gloves. A pair of gloves reportedly found on the side of a road near Nancy Guthrie's home. And according to local media, as well as the New York Post, those gloves are now being tested for DNA to see if they are somewhat connected to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. Now, many people are also pointing to the videos of the masked and armed individual who was seen on Guthrie's doorstep the morning that she vanished on February 1st. And there are so many questions about who this person is, whether they know the Guthries, and if they physically took Nancy, or was the person that we see here just a potential partner in crime who tampered with the cameras. So let's dive into some of the theories that have been suggested as this story has developed. And just to be clear, these are all just possibilities and theories. The sheriff and the FBI, they have remained very quiet about any potential leads or suspects in the case. So the first theory we're talking about today is a classic, frankly, for anyone who watches Law and Crime or takes in true crime content. And it's the first step of any kind of investigation. Police look at the people closest to the crime. That whoever took Nancy Guthrie was a member of the Guthrie family. Now, in the hours before Nancy vanished, she was at her daughter Annie's house in Tucson for dinner. What we know is that Nancy Ubered to Annie's house, which is just about 10 minutes away from her home, around 5:30. It was a nice family night. They had dinner, they played games, and then a family member drives her back to her own home at 9:45-ish. Now, the sheriff won't say specifically what family member drove Nancy home. Nancy's daughter's house, that's been the focus of a lot of law enforcement activity. We see law enforcement going back to Annie's home almost on a daily basis, and we have seen them talk to neighbors of Annie, asking if there is any sort of doorbell camera, surveillance camera that can help them piece together what happened on the night before Nancy Guthrie disappeared. In fact, on Wednesday night, investigators were seen going into Annie's home again, and then they came out reportedly with a bag. Unclear what was in the bag, but they had gloves on, and it's been reported that Annie and her husband are no longer staying at that house, and that's understandable because police and the FBI continue to comb through it, and there is so much media attention outside their home as well. Now, it is unclear why law enforcement continues to focus on Annie's home beyond the fact that Nancy was there prior to her disappearance. Now, the Guthrie family said that when the surveillance pictures were released, they didn't recognize the person as someone who they knew. Savannah Guthrie is very close with her family. Annie is her older sister. She also has a brother named Cameron, and we've seen the three of them arm in arm in videos posted last week saying that they would pay the ransom money to whoever sent those alleged notes to media outlets like TMZ.
This is very valuable to us, and we will pay.
Now, as a reminder, everything that we have heard from the FBI and the sheriff's department has been that the family's been very cooperative. When deputies went to Annie's house to search it last weekend at night, that was a consensual search. They didn't need a search warrant to do it. Now, it should be noted that former News Nation journalist Ashley Banfield released a report on her YouTube channel, Drop Dead Serious, seemingly pointing the finger at a family member, Nancy's son-in-law. Hours after her report, the Pima County Sheriff's Department fired back on social media, tweeting, quote, "Detectives are working closely with the Guthrie family. While we appreciate the public's concern, the sharing of unverified accusations or false information is irresponsible and does not assist the investigation. No suspect or person of interest have been identified at this time." Now, another potential possibility in this case is that whoever took Nancy Guthrie was someone who is targeting Savannah. She's hosted the Today Show. since 2012. She is one of the most recognizable faces on TV. She interviews celebrities, presidents, and other powerful people. She has spoken with President Trump, who offered his full support in this case. She's connected, and she has money. Could that make her and her family a target? Now, the Pima County Sheriff said that his department has been in touch with NBC's security to see if Savannah has received any sort of threat or anything that might be of interest to this case. Nancy Guthrie's also been a regular on the Today Show. In fact, her last appearance on the show spotlighted her love of Tucson. That was in November of last year. The segment talked about how she moved to Tucson in the 1970s, and she decided to stay in the area to raise her family because of the laid-back and gentle quality of life. Savannah went to college and high school in Tucson before she followed her dreams in a career in television news. Now, it is possible that someone knew that Nancy was in that community based on what they saw on TV. It's unclear if that's the case here, but something that you do have to think about. Now, one of the big questions as this case has been developing is who had access to Nancy Guthrie's house. We know that she lived alone, but she also had health issues. The sheriff said that she couldn't walk 50 yards by herself, but she was still sharp mentally. But the medication, that's been such a big concern. The sheriff saying she needs medication daily. Without it, it could be fatal. Now, Nancy needed help, and apparently she did have some help in the form of people like a pool cleaner or gardener who would come to her property. According to Fox News, hired help has been asked to give DNA swabs in the case. Now, another person who said that he may have been at Nancy Guthrie's home at some point is Carlos Palazuelos. Now, he's the delivery driver who was detained Tuesday night in Rio Ricos, Arizona, about an hour south of Tucson near the U.S.-Mexico border.
They helped me against my will. They didn't read me my rights until 2 hours later. Okay? You know what I mean? My wrist is all swollen.
From
the handcuffs. Like,
and did you have any idea
no,
that this was about him? And do you know who Nancy Guthrie
no.
is?
That's the problem. No, I don't know anything.
You were like...
This is video per CBS News. Carlos said he had nothing to do with Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. In fact, he said he had never heard of Nancy Guthrie. He had never heard of Savannah Guthrie until law enforcement pulled him over while he was driving for DoorDash.
And so then when they came up on you, what did they say? Like, what did they say?
Nothing. Literally nothing. They just told me, stop moving. Like, what's your name? Carlos. And that's it. They put me in the cop car. You gotta wait like 2 hours. I waited like 2 hours until the detectives came here and everything.
Oh my God.
Well, when they finally told you this had to do with some kidnapping, like what were you thinking?
What the f*** am I doing here? I didn't do anything. To be honest, like, I'm innocent.
And you don't even know who the lady is? Do you know who Savannah Guthrie is?
No. I don't follow the news.
Right.
I don't watch.
You don't watch the Today Show?
No.
So this was a complete shock.
It was.
Now, even though Carlos has been adamant he has nothing to do with the Guthrie case, it's important to note that law enforcement said that they did have a search warrant to go through his house, meaning that investigators had to present evidence to a judge who then signed off on allowing them to search his house and take his electronics. We are learning more now about why law enforcement may have circled in on Carlos, or more specifically his home. ABC News is reporting that the FBI ID'd Carlos based off cell phone usage information and traffic data. Now, it's unclear specifically what about those things made law enforcement believe that Carlos would be someone that they would want to talk to. Carlos suggested that as a delivery driver, he may have dropped off a package at Nancy's house during the day. He works for a different delivery company than DoorDash in the Tucson area. So that is a possibility. But again, they would need more evidence than that to get a search warrant. Carlos's mother-in-law told reporters that law enforcement showed her the surveillance pictures and asked if it was her son-in-law, and she said no. But when you hear that, you do wonder if law enforcement truly believed that they were on the cusp of breaking this case wide open on Tuesday night. Now, when you hear about electronics, you have to think about the alleged ransom notes sent to TMZ and at least 2 Tucson television stations demanding money for Nancy Guthrie. Now, it's unclear whether those notes are legit. TMZ says that their sources tell them the FBI is operating on the belief that the notes were sent by the person or persons responsible for allegedly taking Nancy Guthrie. However, we have heard some skepticism from law enforcement experts. On one hand, those notes mention specifics that may not have been public at the time they were sent. The FBI said that it talked about Nancy's Apple Watch still being in the house and something about floodlights on the outside of the home. Those floodlights have since been removed. Now, on the other hand, those notes were sent a day after Nancy was taken. The notes also had 2 deadlines, and whoever sent the notes never communicated further, to our understanding, with law enforcement or the Guthrie family, and they never offered any sort of proof of life images that we know about. Another theory that we have seen suggested is whoever took Nancy Guthrie was a member of a larger criminal organization, even a cartel, from just over the border in Mexico. We know that FBI Director Kash Patel said that law enforcement is looking for multiple persons of interest in this case, but it's unclear how sophisticated the people who may have taken Nancy Guthrie are as criminals. I asked former CIA and FBI agent Tracy Walder about whether any part of this case seems to point in the direction of a cartel.
Cartel doesn't completely make sense to me. Cartels, yes, they do ransoms and those kinds of things, but cartels tend to be quite brutal and quite showy with the violence that they inflict on people, and they don't seem to care necessarily. So what I would think, if Mexico's even involved, which I don't even know that it is, and they said they have not engaged with officials in Mexico, if they are even involved, it's more likely that someone here took her there rather than someone there coming here.
Joining us now to talk more about this case and where it could go next is Chris McDonough, homicide investigator. Thank you for being with us here on Law and Crime. It seems like, and just as we're coming on and recording this, they just put a tent out in front of the doorway to Nancy Guthrie's home. That's where we saw the video of the blood, and potentially that's where this armed individual was the morning of February 1st when Nancy Guthrie was taken. But each day, it seems like there's still a lot of activity at her house, in her neighborhood, as well as Annie's house, her oldest daughter. What do you make of investigators continuing to go back to those areas now 12 days later?
You know, Chris, I think what's happening right now, based on the video coming back, there's a lot of lab stuff starting to return, right? Like this video. And if you'll notice in that particular video, you see the suspect standing on that mat, the outdoor mat. You also see the debris that was still on the porch. Okay. Even, before the video came in. So they're probably going to process that mat, out there. And that's maybe why they put the tent up, in front of the door there. Okay. Because there's a system that you can use. It's called an MVAC system. And what you can physically do, it's like a vacuum cleaner that essentially sucks up any type of debris or anything like that. And you can actually take that and test it for DNA. So my suspicion is at this particular point, they probably have another DNA hit somewhere, or in terms of information that's come back. And so you're going to start seeing situations like this where they're going to canvass the neighborhoods a lot more. They're going to be looking for digital footprints because they probably got digital evidence back now, and they're trying to tie those things together.
You know, law enforcement has continued to say that they don't have a suspect or person of interest in this case. We have these images. They detained this man the other day, but then let him go. You still see them going to Annie Guthrie's house a lot, and that's where Nancy was for dinner, game night with family, and then she's driven back home on February, or I guess it was January 31st, and then February 1st she's taken. What do you make about just the focus there seems to be? And it's all consensual searches that from what we've been told. It's not like a search warrant that they need to go in. It seems like the family's very cooperative. But what do you make of just the amount of attention that we have seen on the place, not that she was taken from, but the place she was before?
So remember in the victim risk continuum, right? This is a very, very low risk victim, very low risk. And so that tells us that, the victim and the suspect at some point had some type of association, i.e. they crossed paths. Could have been a grocery store, could have been an employee, a friend of an employee, but there is this nexus that connects it. The reason they keep going back there is because the family, Annie and I believe her husband, the brother-in-law, has said, hey, we were the last to see her alive. We were also the first to discover that she wasn't in the house. So they were the first and the last. Okay. And an interesting anomaly that I've caught from, my experience is the garage door. So the sheriff puts on the timeline, the garage door opens at 9:48 p.m. and then it closes at 9:50 p.m. So that tells us they have that data from that garage door, either the keypad or the system there, right? But what we're not seeing is when the family arrived, a timeline if that garage door opened. So that means that leaves this gap that says, okay, well, how did they get into the house? If they went through the front door, they certainly had to see all that blood. If they went through the garage door, you're going to get that data that they may be holding back. Okay. And then the third option is, how did they go through the same point of entry that the perpetrator may have gone through? So those are kind of investigative anomalies that you have to cross those T's and dot those I's, and say, okay, well, did you see the blood on the porch? If you went through the garage, how come we don't have a data point on that? If you went through the back door, wasn't that suspicious enough almost immediately, to call the authorities? And if you notice, the very, very first interview that the sheriff gave, the first thing he was asked by a journalist was, who dropped her off? And he says, the family. And then the follow-up question, which was a great question, was, did they see her inside the house? And he answers, yes. Okay. That's very problematic. So he knows something that we don't know.
Because that was that, and I, keep going back to that part, because the follow-up is, another follow-up was just like, who was the family member? We know that Annie Guthrie's married, and then there's been this report that was put out there where, that, her husband, was, his name has been out there, and there's been nothing to this point that has, publicly by law enforcement said that, that they have a suspect at all. So it's like when the sheriff was asked who was the person, and we don't know specifically who's the person who drove Nancy Guthrie home, and he's not answering it. Do you read anything into that? Or is it something where he might just say, because of the media attention on this person, just to protect them? Because if you throw, their name out there in a news conference, then suddenly the internet, tries to incriminate someone even more if they're completely innocent.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think the sheriff did the right thing by kind of holding back, because at that point, everybody's on the table at this point, right? Because you have to start, in that inner circle, like we were talking about there, because in that inner circle is that cross. Okay. However, there is one other interesting point on this. Okay. Remember the fruitcake out in, LA, who decides to inject themselves into the largest, kidnapping case, probably since the Lindbergh baby. Okay. In terms of publicity and et cetera. And this guy just decides to say, yeah, I think I'll just go ahead and ask, for Bitcoin, et cetera. They have to eliminate that guy too, because you have to ask yourself, well, why didn't you communicate with Savannah? Why didn't you communicate with her brother? Okay. You chose to communicate with her sister via text message. But you notice the anomaly in this is this guy also says, yeah, and I reached out to the brother-in-law. Okay. Well, the brother-in-law is not even on the radar at that point. Okay? So you got to ask yourself, well, why are you picking the brother-in-law to communicate? And then the next piece of this puzzle in that affidavit is the authorities have said he makes a 9-second phone call, the suspect in LA, but they don't tell us to who. Okay. They just said a family member. Okay. So that to me stuck out. It's like, well, why does this guy inject himself into this case, to get arrested? That's crazy. And then the second piece is, well, who did he call? I'd like to know that. And then, so as an investigator, you're going to have to unwind all of that. You're going to have to re-engineer it as a whole.
What do you make of the ransom notes? Does that follow the pattern of how a ransom note typically operates? And then at the same time, it's like, if you're someone who's sending a ransom note, do you want to follow the path that every other ransom note has? Because in a lot of these cases, we know the FBI is very good at tracking down people who send ransom notes. So, does the fact that it might be a little different with when the ransom note was sent out, the fact it went to media outlets, the fact that there are 2 deadlines, does that something that, I guess, discredits the credibility? Or could it be something where this is a person who said, because maybe they're, very good at sending ransom notes, they looked and said, I'm not going to follow the same path as everybody else?
So, yeah, the ransom note is an anomaly here in relationship to the behavior of the perpetrator, right? The BAU wrote every single word inside of the response that the families read. I can assure you of that. Okay. So the first thing they obviously wanted to do is, well, fine, we've got your letter. Okay. The fact that they went to 2 TV stations and, a major outlet, an entertainment outlet, the fact that they sent it to 3, points of interest, okay, is an anomaly in of itself, because that kind of says, hey, wait a minute, this an attention seeker, et cetera. However, there had to be some information that the authorities saw in there that said, okay, this could be legit. Let's take a look at this, get the BAU, let's write the response. Okay. So the first thing that they wanted to see, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, no. I was going to just say, because then you have this 3rd ransom note that comes in yesterday. And that was one where it just, for 1 Bitcoin, I'll tell you where it was, but there wasn't.
Right.
And that was TMZ putting it out there. It wasn't the FBI, because the FBI had in a news conference kind of gave some legitimacy that they were taking the initial ransom notes seriously, whether they're true or not. This one from TMZ just kind of didn't pass the smell test for me. I don't know about for you.
No, I'm 100% with you. That one right there is kind of just, what we would call noise, right? Background noise right now with somebody trying to jump on the bandwagon. To be honest with you, I had to, I made a comment that, remember the old Nigerian, hey, you've inherited, $5 million, right? That kind of plays into that, principle, because the FBI's offered a $50,000 reward. If you want money, just go turn this guy in and go get the reward. The feds are going to give it to you.
And when it comes to the description of this person, and I know there's been some local reports that maybe they know the type of brand that he was wearing, the backpack that was still, it was full when he was there at the front steps of the house. Those backpacks are sold. The one, I think it was Ozark Hiking Trail, Ozark Trail, something like that, is one that I think is being at least put out there as a possibility. It's sold at Walmart. I mean, those, how many of those are sold a day? I mean, it seems easier said than done to figure out, okay, these are the people who bought, these types of backpacks. How do you actually go about finding value in that direction when it comes to a particular brand?
Well, what you do is you coordinate with, that private partner, right? They have a security division in Arkansas where their headquarters is. And you say, look, here's the type of item that we're looking for. We want to know if there's any point of purchase video of, the individual actually scanning the item. And so then there you can, if you get video, then you can get, transactions, information in relationship to, credit cards or that, et cetera. And so that becomes more of chasing down the, the financial chain, right? And if you happen to get lucky and get a video of him purchasing it, that's like a home run. Okay. And that's what the feds do the best. They have these relationships with a lot of these corporate partners, and you throw a search warrant at them and say, look, this is an exigent circumstance. We have an 84-year-old woman out there. She still hasn't been found, and we believe this could possibly be the suspect. And if a judge signs off, you throw it to their security department and they'll go to work for you.
And, the term sophisticated it just never feels right to call a criminal sophisticated, just especially in a case as horrific as this. But when you watch that doorbell camera of this person, what they're wearing, the way, just the mannerisms that they have, did this stand out to you as someone who would be characterized by law enforcement as a sophisticated criminal?
No. This individual is not a sophisticated, let's think through this, because, there's a couple clues, right? the holster that he's wearing is for a revolver. Okay, number one, and he's got an automatic pistol inside of that particular holster, so he doesn't have a lot of experience around guns. Okay, that's what that told me. The second piece of this puzzle is the type of gloves that he's wearing. I mean, those are large, bulky gloves. Okay, well, how are you going to get your finger into the trigger guard if you need that particular gun? Okay, so that's more of a persona of intimidation. Okay, that tells us, is that really even a real gun? Is it a replica? We don't know. They're chasing that down now. I'm sure of it. Okay. With that video, that's come out. If it is a real gun, then that tells us he's prepared to use deadly force. That's a problem. Okay. And then the other thing that we look at is his problem solving capability. When he gets to the porch and he discovers, the light, that tells us, one, he didn't plan on that piece of it. Okay. Or if he did, then is he acting? Is this something that he is, just kind of going with it? Because his resolution to the problem, as we saw, is to pick up the debris and cover the doorbell. Okay. And when you think through that, okay, it's like, okay, is there a car now? If this guy can't even figure out how to, disengage a doorbell up front initially, potentially, right? Because that's what the timeline says. Mm-hmm. Okay. Then how does he get her out of the house? And if there's a car, is there a second person, or is this guy, how is this guy operating? So that told me there could be a second person as well. And my thought process there was this: if he's coming to the front and the other guy's coming through the back, is he expecting the guy to come through the house and open the front door? And that was kind of like the aha moment. Oh crap, there's a doorbell here. Mm-hmm. Okay. Or, we go back to, is this guy, just a bumbling idiot? Okay. At the door. And there's somebody else pulling the strings away from him. And maybe he's just going to get, a couple of bucks, through the side here to get her out of the house. But he has successfully gotten her out of the house. So that gives us some indication that there was a thought process here. But I don't think he's the sharpest tool in the shed right now.
No, and you have to wonder if they had some moment, whoever the people were, and hopefully it's not something, if Nancy Guthrie is still alive, that it would be making her situation even more dangerous. But I'm sure there was a moment, wherever they are, wherever they're watching, where they realized that video actually did exist and the FBI does indeed have it. That probably changed, how they're feeling about how this is going on. And hopefully they're brought to justice sometime soon, now in day 12 of the search for Nancy Guthrie. Yeah. Chris McDonough, homicide investigator. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks, for taking the time to be with us.
Absolutely, Chris. Thank you so much.